Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. It's been a few days since my last video, so I thought I'd make another one in between all the videos I'm doing on my top 130 movies of all time list. That's uh, that's almost done. It's almost done. It's 5 parts in, and one or two more parts to go, and it'll be done. I'll be posting it up. Right now, I thought I'd do a thrift store haul because it's piling up on my desk, and I'd like to get rid of all of it, put it on the shelves. And I like to pass it by you guys first before doing that. So a lot of books and a lot of movies here. So not much else of other stuff, but it's mostly movies and books that I find when I go out at the thrift store. Occasionally, I'll find some CDs, which is cool, or some records, but usually not. And sometimes some other stuff, video games as well. But we'll see. All right, but basically, this is all the stuff that I got through the thrift store. I thought maybe I'd do some movies first, and do some books, and then do some more movies. Let's see how quickly we can go through it. There's a lot of stuff here. So, all right. So first up is The Police DVD. Basically, this is put out by Edge Hill Publishing. Okay, so Edge Hill did a whole group of these. If you notice on the top, it says Rock Milestones. Well, this one is on Regatta de Blanc. All right, Regatta de Blanc from The Police. It's probably the Police's greatest album, although probably my favorite album by The Police is Synchronicity. That came out in the early 80s. This one came out in the late 70s. Anyway, so this one has like Message in a Bottle. What else does it have it on? And Walking on the Moon, the two main songs from this album. Anyways, it's a series of DVDs. It has The Clash. There's one for The Clash, one for Thin Lizzy, Asia, Metallica. They have a whole bunch of them, all rock milestone DVDs, and they're basically documentaries on individual albums or the bands. And It's pretty interesting. This one has basically they don't have all the main guys, but they do have the first guitarist Henry Padovani, and he talks about this album and why it's great and everything else. And he got some music critics on it as well. So I thought I'd pick it up, see how it is. All right, so that's The Police Rock Milestones. We get at the Black. All right, so next up is the Guess Who Running Back Through Canada DVD. Basically, this is a live concert in Winnipeg where the Guess Who started. And basically, it's a reunion concert, and they did a tour across Canada back in 2000. And it was a huge success. And this concert was probably the highlight of it all, if it wasn't interrupted by like an hour-long thunderstorm and rain and everything. But people stuck around, and they ended up playing through the whole concert. You got 15 songs plus 6 extra bonus songs on this, and basically the Guess Who are probably Canada's greatest band, unless maybe you think the Tragically Hip are, which I would argue. And it put Cummings and Bachman back together after that split back in the day when Randy Bachman left the Guess Who and formed Bachman Turner Overdrive, the Taking Care of Business band, and Cummings had a pretty good solo career as well, but here they reunited in 2000 and did a big tour, and it was a huge success. And they came out with a double CD of that, compilation of all the different concerts. Took tracks from some of the concerts across Canada, put them together in a double CD. And this one is the DVD version, but it's of the Winnipeg concert. It's about a couple of hours long, and if you're a fan of the Guess Who, you should really search out this. You'll probably really enjoy it. All right, so that's the Guess Who's Running Back Through Canada. Next up is I found Rush Hour 3. I collect Brett Ratner directed films, and this is one of Brett Ratner's movies. And I have a lot of Jackie Chan films as well, but I did not have this one. Actually, no, I do have this, but I have it on DVD. I think it's a 3-pack of all 3 movies in one single DVD case. But I didn't have this on Blu-ray, so now I have it on Blu-ray, and it's a fun film. All 3 of these films are fun. I mean, if you're not taking life too seriously and you like a lot of action with a lot of comedy, and you enjoy Chris Tucker's sense of humor, you should enjoy it. All right. Next up after that is a Michael Bay film from 2013, and that's Pain and Gain. I have this on DVD. I don't have it on Blu-ray. I collect Michael Bay films just because of a few films that I like of his. Most of his films, I don't know, they could have been done better, I think. But he is a big name for action films throughout, the last 20, 25 years, right? And he did make one film. He did the Transformer films, but I found a lot of those films lacking. In my opinion, it was because the camera work on the CGI or whatever it is makes it look like they're way too close to the action. They should be pulling the camera back so you can actually see the whole scene and fight going on rather than be so close to them where it's just smashing and movement and you don't know what the fuck's going on. So kind of blew that uh, a bit, but I like The Island really a lot, and that's probably what made me a fan of his. This film is not a great film, all right? It's basically them two are idiot bodybuilders, and they go about kidnapping and murdering people for money. So they don't do a very good job at it either, right? So it's supposed to kind of be a comedy, but it's more of a tragedy, if you know what I mean. But I like collecting directors, and then I'll get all their stuff, and then move on to another director, right? So there's Pain and Gain. I wouldn't recommend this film if you haven't seen it. So after that is a 1987 film directed by Oliver Stone, and that is Wall Street. Again, I have this on DVD, but I don't have it on Blu-ray, so I got it on Blu-ray. And this I got all from the same thrift store. All these really good films, all in their slipcases. So it looks like a gentleman got rid of his movie collection. He didn't want it anymore and donated it to a thrift store. And I picked up all the ones that that I didn't have on Blu-ray. So Wall Street is one of the great '80s films. It's about the greed and the greed of Wall Street, and everybody's going after money and no scruples, no you can't have scruples if you're a trader on Wall Street, right? So it goes into that kind of thing, right? So next up after that is a 2014 film starring Jake Gyllenhaal, and it's Nightcrawler, and it's directed by Dan Gilroy. And this is basically he's like a night owl, and he goes around looking with his camera for crime and stuff at night, and then he takes that footage and he sells it to the TV studios for their news programs, right? And he's kind of a sleazeball, and but you won't have seen a film that's like this, right? It's quite unique, and that's the reason why I enjoyed it and collected it, even though I don't collect the director, right? So that's Nightcrawler. All right. So next up is Oz the Great and Powerful, which is a prequel to the 1937 classic with Judy Garland. This basically takes place before that, when the Wizard of Oz ends up getting into a balloon and ends up in Oz accidentally, and then he ends up. It tells the story of how he became the great and powerful Oz, right? And, he fights the witches uh, in order to get that way, and you get to see how the Wicked Witch of the West ends up turning green and a whole bunch of other things. But it's quite fun. But it's directed by Sam Raimi, and I collect Sam Raimi because of the Evil Dead films and the Spider-Man films. So I figured I'd pick this one up to add it to that collection, right? So that's Oz the Great and Powerful. So next up is Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike in Gone Girl, and this one is directed by the great David Fincher. And if you don't know David Fincher, you got to know him. He did the third Alien film. He did what did he do? He did Seven. He did Fight Club. He did Panic Room. So many good films he's done, and this one is no exception. This is an extremely good film. It's a box set film that has booklet and the film itself in it, so it's kind of nice. I have this on Blu-ray like this, but I only have this part of it. I don't have the rest of it. So when I saw this at a thrift store for $4, I said, okay, good, I'll upgrade it and get it in the nice the nice box set for it. And the film is extremely good if you have not watched it. I'm not a huge fan of Ben Affleck. Uh, he's okay. The films that him and Matt Damon star in, especially the Kevin Smith films, I enjoy, but it's not because of that, not because Ben Affleck is in them. It's just, Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith makes an enjoyable film. He's in Dazed and Confused. He played an unlikable character in that Linkletter film, but I'm not a huge fan of his, but he's the star here. And actually, he's a pretty sympathetic character in this, even though he's cheating on his wife. Because basically, his wife disappears, and the police start investigating him, thinking that that she was murdered by him. Meanwhile, she's setting him up. But I don't want to really get into all of it. It's really a really good film, and Fincher does great work. So you're going to really enjoy it if you haven't watched it yet. And the twists and turns in the plot are extremely enjoyable. Right. So if you have not seen Gone Girl, pick it up. You're going to really enjoy it. All right. So that's basically the first part of the movies that I have, and the other ones are behind this big, huge stack of books. So I can't really get at them. So I'm going to go through some books to get rid of them. All right. So let's get some of these books out of the way. First up is Joseph Conrad, the Polish English writer. This is one of his best books called Nostromo. But he's the guy that wrote like Lord Jim and Heart of Darkness. Out of all of his books, Heart of Darkness is the only one that I read. And basically, I read it because I really enjoyed the film Apocalypse Now, which it was based on. Although Apocalypse Now takes place in Vietnam, and Heart of Darkness, if I remember correctly, it takes place on the Nile in the Congo, right, in Africa, right. So they kind of switched the places for the film. But anyways, this is supposed to be really good. Conrad has a very pessimistic view of the world and of the people that live in it, and you'll see it in his writings. And this one is, and Lord Jim is another one that's really good examples of that, where his characters, let's say, try to do some good in the world, but they're always stymied or blocked by people that either have more power and stop them, and they're bad people, or they just go off the tracks or whatever, right? So he doesn't have a very pleasant view of the world. So if you read Lord Jim or you read Nostromo, just be prepared for that. A lot of it's like anti-hero kind of thing. It's not a lot of pleasant people doing good things, right? So, but he's considered one of the greatest 20th century writers of all time. So I would not argue with that. All right. So next up is the selected stories of D.H. Lawrence. And D.H. Lawrence was put out by Cambridge, which is a really, really good imprint, Cambridge University. They're really academic in the use of their literature. You'll usually have other things accompanied with it. At minimum, you'll usually have an introduction by a really, really great writer and and a good editor, right? So uh, this one basically is selected short stories. So I have not read D.H. Lawrence's short stories, but I know that this will resell, so that's the reason why I picked it up. All right. After that is the stories of John Cheever, another collection of short stories. John Cheever is another great writer. He won the Pulitzer, right? Did he win the Pulitzer? Yeah, he won the Pulitzer. And this is basically his stories. I've not read his stories, but another book that's easy to resell. All right, so next up is Albert Camus. Is that how you spell his name? Pronounce his name? The French Algerian author who won the Nobel Prize or the Pulitzer. What did he win? Did he win the Pulitzer? Anyways, um, if you have not read Camus, I highly suggest that you read him. I've only read two of his books. I read The Stranger and I read The Plague. I have not read The First Man. This one is his last novel. It's actually incomplete. How the story goes is he is in a car with the manuscript for this, the incomplete manuscript for this, and he gets into a car accident and dies. And his on the scene is found this book, basically the written manuscript for this book, and his daughter 30 years later. So that was in 1960, and then his daughter uh, basically published this book, and it's incomplete, but basically it's an autobiography in story form of his life growing up because he was born in Algeria of French parents. All right, so it just kind of relates a lot of the stuff that he went through when he was a kid living in Algeria, right? So it's supposedly it's supposed to be really good, but I'm not sure how good a book is if it's left unfinished when you read it. You kind of get to the end and you go, hmm. But people have read it. So, all right, so that's The First Man by Camus. All right. Next up is Thomas Mann's Death in Venice. All right. And this book, when it was written, wasn't as ignorant intellectual, controversial as it may more and more become, because this is basically a book about, I don't know, could you call him a pedophile? It's basically an older man who ends up falling in love with the beauty of a younger boy. I think he's in his early teens, right? Um, and he kind of follows him around the city. And at the same time, there's I think it's a cholera epidemic in the city that he is, and he should leave, but he just can't leave because he's in love with this boy. Now, he never makes contact with the boy, all right? He just kind of watches him from afar. So he's kind of like a stalker, basically. But the way that man writes this, it isn't, like a dirty sexual thing. It's more of a, when you look at a painting and you're in awe of it because of its beauty or whatever, that kind of thing. Now, it's a short novel. Um, I have not read it, but that's, when you read enough books, you end up coming across other books, and then you're reading about books as well, and this is one of them. So it's basically a homosexual man who falls in love with a teen boy, but he doesn't make any contact with the boy. So maybe that's why it kind of isn't as controversial as it could have been, right? So, but anyways, it's supposed to be a really good book. I just have no interest in reading it, but it does sell well, so I picked it up. Next up is Papa Hemingway, a personal memoir by A.E. Hoshner. Basically, A. Hoshner hung out with Ernest Hemingway uh, for long periods of time, and he ended up writing this, kind of like a memoir of that time. So anything with or about Hemingway is popular. All right, so next up is William Faulkner's The Unvanquished, and basically this is a novel, but originally it was like 7 short stories that they put together into this novel, and it's basically put in 7 parts, and it takes place during the American Civil War. I have not read this book. The only book I've read by Faulkner is The Sound and the Fury, and I had such a difficult time trying to read through that. I don't know, maybe I just can't read Southern fiction. I'm not sure, but it was unrelatable to me, and I had a lot of difficulty getting through it. In fact, I think I blocked it out of my head because I don't even remember what The Sound and the Fury is about. I would have to look it up to see, even though I read the book. So that gave me a bad taste in my mouth for Faulkner, and I've never read anything of his since. But Faulkner is a really good seller. He's a Nobel laureate. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature. What he, what is he considered the greatest writer from the South? Is he, or is it Mark Twain? I don't know. Anyways, he's one of the great American writers. He's up there with Hawthorne and Twain and all the others, right? So, but I just have difficulty reading his stuff. Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't. I only, like I said, read one of his books and then I moved on. It was such a brutal experience for me. I don't know why. All right. So next up is another short story collection, but this one is by Saul Bellow. It's Saul Bellow Collected Stories. All right. Uh, I've not read Saul Bellow's Collected Stories, so I can't really go into that. Next up is Nabokov's Glory. All right. I have not read Glory. I did read Lolita. That was a good novel, a little bit risque or whatever, but just like A Death in Venice, Lolita is kind of like that taboo, but actually the man gets involved with the girl, you know, not a little bit, but all the way basically. So uh, this one I have not read. So, but Nabokov is one of the great uh, Russian writers. So All right. Then John Cheever's Falconer. I have not read this book either. If you notice, I mean, this I got all in one. All these things that I'm showing you right now, I got all at one uh, thrift store, and I got a bunch of like the Blu-rays at another thrift store. So somebody dropped off their collection of Blu-rays at that thrift store, and I got a bunch of really good Blu-rays from that thrift store. Then I went to another thrift store, and it looks like somebody dropped off their classics. Uh, they were really good, really big into short stories and classic literature, and I must have picked up like 30 classic books. And we're going through them now. So John Cheever's Falconer. I have not read this book, so I can't really discuss it much. And then we have Marcel Proust's Swan's Way. All right. Proust is he has a set of those eight memoir books that are really popular for readers. So this one is part of the Penguin Great Books of the 20th century, another sub of Penguin, right? So yeah, seven volumes, not eight. I thought it was 8 volumes. Why did I think of Remembrance of Things Past, basically? And this is the first book. It's called Swan's Way. So if you have a large amount of time, pick up the 7 volumes of Proust's, like I said, A Remembrance of Times Past, Remembrance of Things Past, sorry. And it is really, really, its reputation, I have not read it, so its reputation is really high. I remember, the only thing I remember about this is when you've sold books long enough, you know that the condition of the book is the most important thing. That when people are buying used books, they're looking for used books because they don't want to pay the full price of a new book, or they're looking for used books because maybe they collect first editions of their favorite authors or whatever, right? So, uh, but they're looking for nice editions. So when you end up selling books, if somebody comes into your bookstore and they have a bunch of books that are good, the first thing you're going to look at is the condition of the book, because it's the more ratty looking the book is, uh, the more difficult it is to sell, and the less you could sell it for if you do, right? Now, there is exceptions to that rule. There is like books that are just rare, and if they come in not the perfect condition, that's fine, because they're so rare that people will want to get them even if they're not in great condition, right? Uh, but most books, you want them to look new if you're going to resell them, right? So, and the newer they look, the easier they are to sell. Somebody gets the discount from so if the book is like $25 new, and you get basically a new book from a person who's read it but took care of it when they were reading it, and it still looks new, you can sell it for like 3/4 of the price of what it is new, and the person benefits from it because they buy the book and they didn't have to buy it new, so they save some money, and then you're buying it for about a third or a quarter of what you're going to sell it for, so you make that money as well, right? But it's always conditioned. But when it came to this series of 7 books, I think it was the Modern Library that had all 7 of those books, 7 volumes of them. Yeah, it was the Modern Library. When they restarted, when they revamped it and started putting them out in those like greenish silver covers. Do I have one here? Yes, I have one here. I'll show you what I mean. Um, like that. All right. So the spines look like that. All right. So they're like silvery green, right? And they're put out by Random House, which owns Modern Library, and they actually bought the Everyman Library imprint as well, which were the two main competitors for cheaper hardcover books back in the day, from the turn of the century into the 1900s or whatever, right? So, but anyways, uh, the Modern Library put out all 7 volumes, all right, and he had that on, was it ABA Books, ABE Books? No, it wasn't. It was on eBay. He had all 7 of those books, but they were library editions, right? If you know anything about books, library editions of books aren't big sellers, because a library book is automatically considered damaged, right? The reason why it is because libraries will protect the books, because they're going to be putting them on the shelves for years. So, they'll protect it with, plastic and everything, but they'll use tape on the plastic to cover up the covers and to protect the books themselves. And trying to take off that tape just wrecks the books. So you kind of can't. And back in the day before they had everything digital, they would put a pocket at the back of the book that would have that paper in it, and you would write your name down because you're the one that borrowed it, and they would stamp it with the date, and you have whatever 7 days to return it. Well, those pocket things are glued to the back of the book or the front of the book, which you can't remove either. Otherwise, you're going to really seriously damage. So basically, a library book is mostly unsellable. Most booksellers won't buy it unless, again, they're hard to find books. Now, these modern library books weren't hard to find. They've been coming out since the mid '90s or whatever, right? And but he had them up because I was going to buy them. Then I realized that they were ex-library books, right? So I didn't buy them because he wanted, what was it? Must have been like $250 or something like that for those 7 volumes. It ended up being like $20 a volume, so maybe 140, maybe yeah, 140 or $150. Yeah, 140, $150, correct. Yeah, so they were like $20. So I offered him 10 because they were ex-library books, and he said no, I can sell them for what I'm pricing them at, and I got into a bit of, I didn't get into an argument, but a discussion saying, I don't think you would be able to. I mean, good luck on it, but if you don't and you're still interested, I would like to buy them for, like $10 each or $75 or whatever, right? And then he texted me because, we exchanged information or whatever. He sent me a text and said he sold them. So somebody did buy them. And so that story, although quite boring maybe, that story was the most mind-blowing story when it came to buying and selling books that I ever heard of, because nobody ends up buying ex-library books because they're usually pretty beaten up, and because of all the stickers and everything and the glue and everything that they use to keep the book, in relatively good shape, but not the shape you want when you're buying a book, right? You want a book to look new, right? So, anyways, what he did, he sold them for almost the price of what they were new. So I guess you learn things. Maybe uh, those books people are really interested in. But this is the first volume of those 7 volumes of his memoirs. So okay, next up after that is Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude. Now did he win the Nobel Prize? He did, right? Yeah, back in 1982. This is one of the greatest Latin American books of all time. I'm not going to get into explaining it. Too many books to go through. But if you have not read that and you want to expand from, let's say, American or English literature, you don't mind books in translation. I mean, you're going to read a lot of great books, like, for example, this one, right? Oh no, he may have written this in English actually. But a lot of the great books are not written in English, right? They may be written in Russian. They may be written in French or German or whatever, right? So you're going to get translations of them to read them, right? So this is no exception. I think this one was written in Portuguese, Spanish or Portuguese, one of the two. All right. So next up is the writings of Henry David Thoreau, Walden. Walden is one of those great philosophical natural books. Natural, is that the word for it? A person who enjoys nature. So he goes out in nature and he walks around. He does walking tours of different places, and when he's out in the forest, he writes and he thinks, and then he writes it down. Right. And, Walden is one of the great books of that type. All right. So if you haven't read that one, next up is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. All right. I have not read this book, uh, but it is. See this Harper Perennial HarperCollins Publishers perennial editions, if I remember correctly, perennial classic editions. These spines, if you know nothing about books and you want to pick up books and read books of more classic nature, not like, the bestsellers that are on New York Times bestseller list, presently or whatever, you may want to read some, 19th century or 20th century literature, uh, Penguin Classics, the Oxford World's Classics. This is another imprint that they all look like that. That spine looks like that. So if you ever see a book with that type of spine on it, see, There's another one, right? All right. These are really good books. These are books that um, you don't have to think on whether it's a really good book. It's going to be a really good book. All right. So HarperCollins put the perennial classics are really good reads. All right. So then I picked up Philosophy of Religion, Selected Writings. All right. Any philosophy books are really good to resell. Philosophy of Religion, that should sell really quickly. All right. Uh, and then the poetry of E.A. Robson, right, which is a modern library. Right? So the modern library, if you take, they continued with the tradition of the older ones. If you take it off and you look at, the inside of the cover, they'll give you a list of all the books that are published at the point of the publishing of this book, obviously. So if this book was published, let's say 10 years ago, there may be more volumes in this library, but you get a really good idea of what books are in the library if you want to go around trying to make a list to collect them, right? So there you go. All of them have this list in on the opposite side of their dust jackets, right? So they're fun to collect, but because they're not numbered, I at the beginning when they first came out, I did start collecting those, and I got up to about 50 volumes of them, and then it was like I was running out of space, and I had the original modern libraries, the smaller pocket hardcover books that they started publishing back in, the what was it like early 1900s, and the Everyman Library. Those spines were numbered, right? So I started collecting those, and then in the 90s they put out the Everyman Library and the Modern Library again in new editions at regular sized books charging regular sized prices, right? So for example, this book is not like cheap. It's $27.95 in Canada, $19.95 in the United States. All right, so they're not like when they originally came out with the original ones, they were put out at a cheap price so that every man or a modern man or whatever, you didn't have to be rich to read good books, right? So they were reasonably priced cheaply. Um, but they kind of went away with that when uh, when Random House decided to put out the Modern Library again. And then they bought the imprint for the Everyman Library and started putting those ones out. They made them more higher end, and they're at the prices of other hardcover books, right? So, but they're all classics. They're usually all books that are in the public domain. All right, so they have no copyright on them, and then they just publish hundreds of them, right? So, right, so that's the poetry of E.A. Robson. I have not read. I don't read poetry, but I know that this will sell pretty easily. So that's almost half of the books that I have. Let's go back and do some movies now, and then we'll do the other half of now that I can reach the movies. All right, so first up is this: the Mission Impossible, the Ultimate Collection. Uh, I'm thinking books now. I'm not thinking movies. So Steelbook. All right. So this is a really nice Steelbook. Has the first 5 movies, 6 movies, 5 movies. How many of them? There's been 6, right? Yeah. So it's the first 5 movies of Mission Impossible, all starring Tom Cruise. And what's funny is this Steelbook also left an extra space. I think it was put out maybe during the time when Mission Impossible 6 was just coming out, and they didn't have a Blu-ray for it yet. So what they did was when they made this Steelbook, they didn't put 1 to 5 on the Steelbook. They just put the Ultimate Collection on it, and then when you open it up and you flip through all the DVDs at the end, at the back on the inside, there's another. It's not a clamshell, but it's like a uh, a receptacle for the 6th disc. All right, so the clamshell you can usually move around, right? Like a page of a book, right? So you can't really call it a clamshell if I'm using the terminology properly. But at the back, so it looks like there's a missing disc in this. But when I looked it up, because I bought it used for $15 off a guy, and was it off a guy? No, it was $15. Was it off a guy? I can't remember. Anyways, I think it was $15 off a guy. Anyways, the back of it is missing a disc, and I thought, oh crap, I bought this and I'm missing a disc from it. But when I looked it up, no, it was the first 5 movies. So it's either the fifth movie in this had 2 discs, and that special feature disc is missing. But what it looks like is they gave an extra space for that sixth movie um, that was coming out onto Blu-ray, and then you can buy the Blu-ray and just add it to this, right? So I actually have this this one, which is all the Blu-rays. I bought it new uh, off a guy who was selling. Well, it's used, but it's new. It still has its plastic. He was selling it, uh, you know, for $20. It's new, but it's used. It's new if you go into a store and you buy it where they originally got it, right? But if you go into a store and you buy it and then you bring it home, even if you don't open it, it it's really used, right? But it's new because you haven't opened it, right? So that's what I did with this one, and it's all 6 of the films on Blu-ray, but not in a steelbook. So I forgot I had bought that. When you're over 5,000 films, sometimes you forget what you have and what you don't have, and sometimes I'm lazy to look it up on my phone. I go, no, I don't have this. I know I don't have a steelbook of this, so screw it. If I know I have a few of the movies, but I forgot that I bought, the 6 pack of it. So I bought this one. So now I'm in a bit of a dilemma because I don't want to keep both of them. But if I sell the other one, then that sixth movie goes out the door, and then I'm going to have to find the sixth movie. But I prefer steelbooks over regular Blu-rays, so I want to keep this steelbook. So what what my brain is saying, we'll take out the sixth Blu-ray from that one and put it in this one and just keep that one, but then try to sell that one with the missing Blu-ray. Yeah, it doesn't work. You're not going to sell it for what you got it for. So what I'll probably do is just keep both, and then when I come across a Blu-ray of the sixth film, I'll just buy that one Blu-ray, and then I'll put it in the steelbook, and then I'll just keep the steelbook. And once I get that sixth film, I'll sell the regular Blu-rays, right? So, but these are really fun films. I don't, like the first one. What was the second one? Directed by John Woo, which is a really good film. The first one was directed by Brian De Palma. Then after that, I don't know who directed the other ones, but the first 2 movies were really fun to watch, and the other ones were good as well. Uh, if you just like plain action films, with a bit of spy interest in it, that kind of thing, they're quite fun. And some of the stunt scenes in it are almost unbelievable, but they're really cool. When he's walking up, when they're in where was it, Abu Dhabi? The big tall building, and he's walking outside on the big tall building on the glass. And when he jumps from that flying helicopter that's in the tube going from England to France, and he jumps from it as as the uh, the helicopter explodes or whatever, and he gets blown onto the train. Right, that was kind of cool. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? It's kind of, yeah, that would never happen, or whatever. But it was fun to watch, right? So all those films are fun to watch. The action scenes are really cool. So all right, next up is I found this steel book as well of Sin City. All right, and I have this on regular Blu-ray, but I'm always upgrading. Uh, if you have not watched Sin City, it's great. Frank Miller's adaptation from the comic book. I think he had a comic book, right? That they adapted into a film, and it's basically a stellar cast in it. It's got that cartoonish kind of feel, black and white. Sexy, good-looking girls in it, and everybody's behaving badly. It's kind of like a film noir. So it's quite fun to watch. And I got that one for $10 to Steelbook, and it still has the J card on it, on the back of it. All right, I like the J cards, but a lot of the times you won't find them because people will take the J cards off because it blocks the nice artwork on the back of the Steelbook. They don't want all this, information and everything. I like that information, so uh, they prefer it like that because it has nice artwork on the back and on the front. So this is Eastern Provinces. Another one I found for $10. Uh, Directed by David Cronenberg, about the Russian mob. Uh, that was quite a good movie. Interesting, that one, and what was the other one? History of Violence, both with Viggo Mortensen, where Cronenberg directed two non-horror films. They're more of like crime action films about bad guys, right? So they were quite good. I enjoyed both of them, right? So the in this one, the fight in the bathhouse, both the guys naked, they're trying to kill each other. I don't think that was ever shown on. No scene like that was ever been in film ever, and you know how difficult it is sometimes to walk when the floor is wet, and these guys are like trying to kill each other, right? Yeah, that was pretty brutal. It's all about strength, right? So it was pretty. I've never seen a scene like that. It was kind of like, huh, I'm not so sure what. Okay, I've never seen that before, so that's kind of cool. And then I found also another Steelbook for 2001: A Space Odyssey. Many consider this film Kubrick's greatest, but I consider probably Clockwork Orange his best film. Maybe Full Metal Jacket or Doctor Strangelove. He has so many good movies. He's one of the greatest directors of all time. You should just sit down one day. All right, Barry Lyndon, another one. I mean, you should just sit down one day, find all of his films, and watch one of them after another, and you'll be totally entertained. And you go, man, this guy really knew how to make movies, right? All right. So next up is The International, starring Clive Owen, and this one is directed by Tom Tykwer, and so that's why I have this on DVD, but I don't have it on Blu-ray. I collect Tykwer because of is it Run Lola Run? He's the one that did Run Lola Run, right? Uh, that was an extremely fun film if you've not seen Run Lola Run. And this one is pretty good as well, but it's not as good as Run Lola Run. But like I said, when I watch a film and I really enjoy that film, I find out who the director is, and then I'll pick up another film by him, and then I'll watch that film. And if I really like that film, then I'm going to find every film by that director and watch it, right? So that's how I usually create my library, is around directors that I enjoy watching. And I know I've watched this film, but it's been a while since I've watched it, so I don't know the details about it. So next up is The Duelists. This is directed by Ridley Scott and on DVD. I do not have it on Blu-ray, and I do not have it on DVD. So now I have another film that I can add to my collection for Ridley Scott, who's one of my favorite directors of Blade Runner, G.I. Jane, those films. This one is The Duelist. I don't know how I haven't watched this film, so I don't know how good it is. But like I said, Ridley Scott, so I picked it up. Okay, next up is the Blu-ray of 12 Years a Slave. I have this on DVD, but I do not have it on Blu-ray, so now I got it on Blu-ray. Now, I've watched this film twice. The first time I watched it, I quite enjoyed it, but the second time I watched it, I stopped at about maybe half to three quarters of the way through of it because I got kind of bored of it. So, I mean, it won the Academy Award, so you think it'd be more entertaining, but and the story is a gripping story. I don't know why. The first time I watch it, I enjoy it, but I don't think it's a movie that's worth, that holds up as well second, third, or fourth time you're watching it, unlike other films. But basically, the film is about a free black man living in New York back in the, mid 1840s, 1850s, somewhere around there, mid 19th century. Some white guys kidnap him, bring him down south, and sell him into slavery, and he ends up being a slave for like 12 years. So hence 12 Years a Slave, right? So it's based on a true story. It won the Academy Award, won a bunch, I think, if I remember correctly. Won for Best Picture, at least, as it says on the front of it. But like I said, I watched it twice. I don't think I'll probably watch it again. Maybe I will, but I won't revisit it for a few years probably. But I got it because I have it on DVD, but I don't have it on Blu-ray, so now I can upgrade. So that's 12 Years a Slave, directed by Steve McQueen, by the way. All right. So next up is Run Lola Run, my all-time favorite Tom Tykwer film. It's a German film, and if you have not seen this film, I highly suggest you watch it. It made me an instant Tykwer fan. I've collected all of his films since. Uh, this tells the story of her, basically. She has a boyfriend, and the boyfriend is a criminal, basically. And he is involved with a bunch of mob guys or bad guys, and he had a job that he needs to pick up a bunch of money for the boss or whatever. And then he ends up being on the train or the subway. Police officer comes onto the subway, and him being a criminal, he just naturally got up and left the subway. Now this guy isn't the most smart guy in the world, let's put it that way. Uh, and he leaves the whole bag of money behind, right? And then he goes back to the train, and it's not there anymore because a homeless guy who was on the train as well finds that money and takes it, right, and leaves with it. So he is outside of a grocery store at a pay booth calling up his girlfriend saying that he's dead. He's going to be killed by these guys unless he can come up with $100,000, which was what was in the bag, uh, in the next 20 minutes when he's supposed to meet them, right? So she says, he says, I'm going to go rob the grocery store that's across the street to get that $100,000. And she says, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that, or whatever. I'll think of something. I'll think of something. And then he goes, okay, well, you got until noon and meet me here by noon. If you're not here by noon, then I'm going to go rob the grocery store. And basically, somebody stole her moped, so she has no transportation, so she's got to run everywhere. So she decides she's going to run, and she runs. And then what happens is a scenario happens. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes for this scenario to happen, and something happens at the end, all right, to it. And then it rewinds and does the whole scenario again with a different, some things happen differently in it, and then they do it again, right? Because the outcome, right? So, and anyways, I think they do it 3 times. It's like a reverse of history, and then redo the thing, but something else happens. There's a little bit of a change because of a little bit of a movement of here and there, and you get to see these scenes develop and move in different ways because of just chance or whatever, right? So basically, Tyquer is showing you um, that uh, it's all chance. It's like 30 seconds of your life. If you leave 30 seconds later from your house, you end up getting hit by a car and dying. If you left 30 seconds earlier, you don't get hit by a car and die, or whatever, that kind of thing, right? Where little snippets of time can control your fate in in a wide range of things, right? What happens is there's some people in it that are kind of like bystanders. So like when she's running, there's a lady with a stroller with a baby in it, and she bumps her, and in another version she misses her, that kind of thing. And then whenever she ends up hitting or passing somebody, uh, they do a big, like a 5 second clip that goes, quick screen, like pop 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 of what happens to her. And sometimes this person ends up dead or hanging themselves, or another time they end up becoming rich, or another time da 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 da, right? So you get to see, so he's basically playing around with time. And it's a really interesting film. And also he adds animation into it too, so sections of the film aren't live, they're animation, right? So it's a brilliant film in my opinion, and I really enjoyed watching it. I've watched it probably about 8 times now, and I still enjoy it every time I watch it. I really enjoy introducing people. One of the ways you know that a film is good is if you get excited introducing a film to another person to watch, right? And every time I introduce this film to another person, I really enjoy watching it, and I don't mind watching it over and over again. But you get excited when you introduce it to a new person that hasn't seen it. That's when you know you've come across a really a film that has charmed you, right? So it's a really really good film in my opinion. All right, so that's, and I do have this on DVD, but now I have it on Blu-ray. All right, uh, so that's all of the films. Yeah, that's all the films it looks like. Now we got a big stack of books left. We're going to go through these quickly because there's a couple of books that I want to go a little bit more in depth with. All right, so we got John Gunther's Death Be Not Proud. It's another one of those HarperCollins classics. Look for these. These are really good books. All right. This one I have not read, so I can't tell you whether it's good or not. But like I said, it's the imprint. That imprint is really good to look for if you enjoy reading. All right. So next up after this is Virginia Woolf's Congenial Spirits, her selected letters. All right. So Virginia Woolf, uh, one of the great female writers of all time, and these are some of her selected letters. Like I said, all these books I got in one thrift store, and it looks like it's letters, short stories, and classic novels. So Gunter Grass, The Tin Drum, another Nobel Prize laureate. So it looks like the person was concentrating on reading Nobel Prize winners, right? And their best books, which this is Gunter Grass's best book. All right. Then you got Thomas Wolfe, Look Homeward, Angel. All right. So next up is Richard Wright's Native Son, one of the greatest African American novels ever written, and it again is a HarperCollins perennial classic, right? This imprint is extremely good. Now, Native Son basically tells about Bagger Vance. No, that's the movie. Bigger Thomas. Bigger Thomas. Yes, Bigger Thomas. All right. So Bigger Thomas is basically an African American criminal in his 20s, living in Chicago, in the South Side of Chicago, and basically he comes into contact with the law because of his crimes, and he ends up having a lawyer, and the lawyer argues in court that the reason why he is a criminal isn't because black people are just criminals. It's because of that's what people expect of black people. Now this takes place in the 1930s, and racism is rampant, right? So basically, his lawyer argues that he has no choice. If he wants to live, if he wants to not starve, he's going to become a criminal because that's all that Americans want black people to be, right? So it's basically an argument where you say, how much is personal responsibility and how much is the society that you live in that pressures you into certain ways, right? Now, when you're born, I mean, you can argue there's philosophical arguments on both sides. You're not evil, all right? You're not bad. You're not a criminal. Right? You're not born a criminal, right? So you grow up and you become a criminal. How much of that is choice and how much of that is the society that you live in? If if the culture is that you're not going to get anywhere in life because of the color of your skin, then becoming a criminal might be your only option of having a half decent life or whatever, right? So it's kind of that argument. It's a really Richard Wright, James Baldwin, and a few other African American authors are just outstanding at talking about those kind of things in the written word, right? So I would highly suggest you read this book. It's extremely good. Next up after that is The Minority Report by Philip K. Dick. So basically, this is a short story collection along the theme of this gentleman really liked to read, or lady really liked to read short stories because so many of the books I picked up are short stories. And Philip K. Dick is one of the huge names in science fiction. He's the one that wrote "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," which was the book that Blade Runner was based on, the film Blade Runner. So, um, but he has a number of them, and the Minority Report, which may be the basis for the Steven Spielberg film of the same name. So I would not be surprised. All right. So next up is Foucault for Beginners, and basically Foucault was a French writer, philosopher, social scientist. He wrote a lot about criminology, and basically this is an introduction to him. It's almost like those primers or for dummy books, right? But basically, it's a lot of it is illustrated, right? It's almost like in comic form, right? But it's not a comic book or whatever. But there's a lot of illustrations in it, and Moshi Susur did the illustrations for it. So, if you have not read any Foucault stuff, there's a lot of stuff out there by him. He's a really interesting writer. If you want to delve into gender studies, sexuality, criminology. Basically, he had a fascination with people that did not conform to the norm, right? And he argues a lot about how a lot of that has to do with it's a social construct, right? It's not like genetic or biologically based. It's sociologically based. So next up is a history book called Hitler's Germany, and basically it goes through Hitler and how he created the Nazi regime, and it's written by Roderick Stackelberg. All right, so uh, I have not read it, but uh, see, Routledge is a very good imprint for academic books. So if you ever see a Routledge book on a subject that you have interest in it, pick it up. It's usually pretty, academically inclined, right? Right. So next up is Abelard and Heloise. Basically, this is an updated translation of the classic, the love letters between the two of them, if I remember correctly. A compilation of the works of Abelard and Heloise ever presented in a single volume in English. The letters and other writings features an accurate and stylistically faithful new translation of both the calamities of Peter Abelard and the remarkable letters it sparked between the ill-fated 12th century philosopher and his brilliant former student and lover. All right, so supposedly those love letters are some of the you know intense and greatest love letters of all time, right? So all right, so next up is the collected poems of W.B. Yeats. I actually picked up this volume uh, a few weeks back and I sold it already. So then I saw this on the shelf and I said, okay, let's pick it up again. I don't read poetry much, but Yeats is one of the big names in poetry, so it's easy to resell. After that is a trade paperback size, a little bit smaller than the usual trade paperback, right? A little bit smaller. Uh, it's to save paper, so you can put it out and it doesn't cost you as much, but it's not as small as a paperback. It's a little bit bigger. So some people like to read paperbacks, but other people I don't like it because the print is kind of small, or the book is really thick. You know what I mean? So some people like to read the bigger softcover books because it's easier to read. I mean, it's more bulky to carry around, but it's easier to read, right? So this is kind of like a compromise between the paperback and the trade size paperback or the softcover. Anyways, it's William Golding's greatest book, Lord of the Flies, about a bunch of grade school kids, British kids, who end up crash landing or end up on a uninhabited tropical island, and how the kids, from grade 1 to grade 6 or grade 7 or whatever, uh, how they fare on an island with no parental supervision, and it can get pretty brutal. Let's put it that way. All right, so that's Lord of the Flies. It's a really good read if you haven't read it. And the gentleman also was a big fan of Jack Kerouac because he had 4 of Jack Kerouac's books. All right. But he did not have On the Road, which is Kerouac's greatest novel. Basically, Kerouac was, part of the Beat generation of the 1950s, that counterculture that spread into the 60s. Uh, he was one of the big names, if not the biggest name, and On the Road is probably the biggest book of that. Uh, what's the word for it? Movement of that movement. But you have 4 of his books, and that's Lonesome Traveler. All right. The Subterraneans, Visions of Cody, and Good Blonde and Others. All right. So 4 of Kerouac's books, and those are extremely easy to sell. So, all right. Next up is, I know I had 2 from this publisher. Yeah, here's the other one. 3 of them. Actually, no, 3. Yep, 3. Okay, so next up I have The Man Who Would Be King and Other Stories, so more short stories by Rudyard Kipling. All right. Tales of King Arthur by Henry Gilbert. All right, if you know who King Arthur is, right? And Robin Hood by Henry Gilbert. So 2 books by Henry Gilbert and 1 by Rudyard Kipling. But if you notice, they're all from, I'm going to blow the name of this, but see that imprint there? That all right. Basically, when you go into bookstores in Canada, they'll have a table of cheap books, I guess you could say, cheap classical books, and most of them come from. Let me see if I can read the name of it properly. Arc Arcturus. All right. So basically, Arcturus puts out all the classic in non-copyrighted books, right? Ones that are in the public sphere, and they put them out for like a cheap price. It's cheap in print. It's they're really nice covers, and they're all brightly colored, so that you'll notice them. And they're basically all the classics that you can think of in literature, and some, I mean, psychology they even have, and philosophy as well. But usually, when you go into the bookstore in Canada, you'll go and there'll be a table or a section of all these imprints from this company, and they're all like, you know, three for $10 or $6 each or $5 or whatever. They all have a sticker on them that give you like $6 or $5 for the book, right? So they're drawings, right, for you to come in, and if you like reading classic literature, they're fun books to pick up. Now, what I do with them is I won't put them up individually because uh, when I find them in thrift stores, they're usually $2 or $3 each, right? So you can't really. Um, it's not worth putting them up one at a time if I'm only gonna, pick it up for two and sell it for $4 or $5, right? So uh, it's not worth the amount of time it takes to put the ad up. So what I'll do is once I get 10 of them, I'll put all 10 and make one ad and sell them for $5 each, or all 10 for like $30. And so you'll get them $3 each if you buy 10 of them. So that'll give me an ad where I'll make like $10 off that ad, more than I spent anyways. And if you do want an individual one, you're going to pay $5 for it, which I paid like $2 for it. So I'll still get $3 from that one. But I only have to put up one ad. I won't have to put up 10 ads. That saves the time, right? So and they're really nice volumes. But the stock, the paper stock on it is not going to be an expensive stock. So as you notice, this one looks a little bit older than, let's say, this one. All right. And if you look at the paper, all right, see the paper? See how one is more yellow than the other ones? So if you are going to collect these and you want to keep them to read them for later, then I would suggest, because they are, I mean, it's all classic literature. They're all of these books that are in this imprint are worth reading. They're all great, right? It's just that they're not made, the glue is probably not great in it, and the paper stock is not great, but the covers and everything are really beautiful, right? See how beautiful they are? I would just put them in a bag. I would put them in as long as the air doesn't get to them, right? You just put them in a bag. If you don't drop the bag anyways, right? They'll fit in a DVD or Blu-ray sized bag, right? Right? That's what they would look like on the shelf. And you get all the air out of the bag, and they'll stay in really good shape. But not if you just put them on the shelves by themselves. They're going to brown really quickly, and they're going to fall apart probably because they're cheaply made, right? So, but they are nice. They all look nice on a bookshelf. All that coloring. If you want to if you like a pastel coloring type of indoor person, where you like a little bit more flash. Um, maybe you'll have a room where you're painted the wall. You didn't paint it white. You may have painted it, let's say, a brighter blue or something like that. Then these books would look really good on your shelves in that type of room, right? So those are those books. Well, okay, next up is Rumblefish and the Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This is her first book, and this is her second book. All right, and both of them, The Outsiders is one of the greatest. It's my argument for the greatest young adult fiction book ever written, and it's basically about two different classes of gangs. One is called the Sosas, so they're the socials. They're the upper class group of guys that like to hang out, and then you got the lower class, the greasers they're called. They slick back their hair with grease, wear the leather coats and everything, and act tough because the only thing they have is their pride, right? Because they have no money, and they're living hand to mouth. So basically, it tells about a group of greasers who end up getting into a rumble with a group of Sosas, um, and one of the Sosas end up dead, and the guy that ended up stabbing him accidentally ends up, getting out of the city and going to a church with his best friend, and they live in a church for a while to escape from the police. Anyways, it's a really pretty intense novel, and then she goes on and writes through like four more, and they're not exactly the same group, but let's say you'll get a peripheral character or one of the characters in this book, and then she'll write another book afterwards, which will look into that character or that character's cousin or a peripheral person from another book, and then they'll move into another book and another book. And she wrote like 4 or 5 young adult novels like this, um, about the difficulty of growing up in the United States if you have no money, right? So uh, they're really good books to read. I read them when I was in high school, and picked up one, and then I realized she had more, and I just took one out of the library and I read it, within a couple of days, and then I took it another one, and read it, read all of them. Like That Was Then, This Is Now was another one. Maybe Rumblefish was the third one. But there was That Was Then, This Is Now, and Text was another one. Basically, they were all made into films, right? Um, I know Text starred Matt Dillon, if I remember correctly, and The Outsiders, it starred all those kids, Ralph Macchio, and it had uh, I'm losing my Emilio Estevez was in it, Rob Lowe was in it, uh, what's his name from Dirty Dancing? He played the older one in it. Anyways, so yeah, if you haven't watched the movie, watch the movie. The Outsiders is really good as well. All right, next up is J.D. Salinger's only novel, The Catcher in the Rye, one of the great American novels written in 1951, in the 50s, anyways. It's basically, the poster child for angst of kids growing up at that time. Where basically Holden Caulfield is the name of the character. He ends up getting expelled from a private school, and he ends up going hang out in the city and meets different people and is all bummed out about life and that kind of thing. So um, it's a really good book, but that was Salinger's only novel, and he wrote some other stuff like short stories and some shorter, not really novels, more like um, novellas that were also published. But that book there is a seminal piece of American literature, and everybody has read that. I read it in high school. Right. Next up after that is Leonard Cohen's only novel. Now Leonard Cohen, as in the musician, as in the singer-songwriter, as in the poet, he wrote one book, and it's Beautiful Losers. All right. And this is part of the New Canadian Library. I've talked about it many times in different uh, videos that I've made. This one is the fourth version, the fourth cover. All right. So there's 6 different covers for this series, I guess you could call them, where they change the cover and then start printing out books again. This one is the fourth cover of the New Canadian Library. The library, basically, if you're going to read Canadian literature, you will be reading mostly the books of the New Canadian Library, because most of the great novels of Canada are in this library. All right. And this is one of them. All right. All right. After that is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, my favorite novel by him. Um, if you have not read Dickens, he just is such a great writer. Other than Shakespeare, I think he's the greatest writer in the English language. Um, he's the type of writer that you could read him. He could be telling you about the weather, and you'd be really interested. He could be, writing about the most inane things, but the way that his style of writing really is really, really good. If I was ever to become a writer, I'd probably copy my style off Dickens. Him and Twain write similarly, right? One more from a British and one more from an American point of view, but the way that they write their prose is really good, I find, and it's really enjoyable to read. So this is a Bantam classic, all right? So basically, Bantam is in competition with, like the Penguin Classic or Signet or the Oxford World Classics and all that. But these all come in paperbacks. They don't have larger versions. Usually they don't anyway. So the Bantam Classics from Bantam Publishing uh, also put out classic novels and books, right? So what I'll do with these ones is, depending on the title, I'll again, like I do with these ones, right? I'll get like 10 of them together, and then I'll put them out for $5 each, or 10 for 30, and somebody will usually pick them up. All right. So here's an example of an Oxford World Classic, not the latest version, but the latest publication cover. It's the one that's before that. All right. And this is Lewis Carroll's two Alice books, Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. One of the classics of children or young adult literature. And these ones, the previous ones, not the newest version of them, the ones with the red, the red, it has red in it. It's red and white, the covers. These ones, I'll do the same thing as these ones and put them at 10 for $30, right? So, and speaking of Salinger, here is another one of his books, and it's called Arrays High the Roof Beam, and Carpenters and Seymour, an introduction. All right. So basically two novellas in one book. All right. This one, the person had it on the bookshelf for a while and didn't protect it. His bookshelf was facing a window. And so what happens over time is, see the color of it? It's kind of like orange. But if you have your books, keep them out of direct sunlight. I mean, if you want to keep your books in a half decent shape, keep them out of direct sunlight. Now, this is a difficult book to find, so I picked it up, and I know I can resell it, but I'm not going to. I might sell it for $3 or $4, right? But I picked it up at a thrift store. At the front of the thrift store, they have books that are just free. They don't think they can sell, so they just put them in the lobby area of the thrift store on some shelves, and all those books are free. And I found this one. I found a modern library there, an older version of a modern library from the 1930s, which is worth about $30. I found it there. They didn't realize what they had, I guess, for free. And I found this one now. The reason why they put this one is maybe they don't know Salinger as the writer, or they don't recognize the book. But if you look at it, see it's orange, and then you look at the spine, it's yellow. It's the reason because this was in direct sunlight for some time. And it basically faded the spine into a yellowish color, right? But because this book, like I've been in and out of the book world for 25, 30 years, right? And this is only the second time I've seen this novel in Canada, well, in the city that I live in, all right? And so I picked it up, even though it's faded. I can still sell this for sure. All right. Um, get running out of space here. All right, so we'll put those there. Next up is another Camus book, and this one is called A Happy Death. And like I said, it's not one of the two books that I've read by him, but Camus is one of France's greatest writers, Algerian French writers, and this is one of his greatest books. So, if you haven't read any Camus, I would highly suggest that you do. Right? All these books are easily resellable, right? Next up after this is a biography of Samuel Beckett, all right? And this will be a little bit more difficult to sell, but because it's such a large book, all right, there are readers who don't enjoy reading something that's maybe that thick. They really enjoy the long books where they can sink their teeth into a novel or a book or any type of book and read it. So they'll read fiction, they'll read nonfiction, but the main purpose of it is to get a large book so that they're spending a good amount of time because they read a lot. And it seems like sometimes they'll sit down and maybe read a book and it's done in 2 days and they move on to the next one. And like 6 months later, they don't even remember the book that they read, right? So they like a book that they can sink their teeth into. And this is that type of book. The biographies or history books are usually larger than literature books. Not all the time. I mean, there are like War and Peace and that kind of thing, right? Uh, but some of them do like reading biographies. And Beckett is one of the big names in literature. So I think I can resell this at a reasonable price. So after that is The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. Not her greatest novel, but one of the great novels. And Margaret Atwood I argue that Margaret Atwood is Canada's greatest writer. I mean, there are some great writers in Canada, but I think Atwood is probably the best. Uh, like my all-time favorite Canadian novel is The Handmaid's Tale, which is written by her. And she has that trilogy, Oryx and Crake, which is another dystopian kind of futuristic novels that I really enjoyed reading. There's The Edible Woman, which is probably her second greatest book, if not her greatest book. Some people will pick that one over the other one. Another one is Surfacing. I mean, she has so many really great books. She's also written poetry and literary criticism. She writes everything. She's just an amazing writer. And this is another one of her books that is really good. All right. So if you have not read Margaret Atwood, there's another name that you should remember. All right. So those are all the books that I wanted to go uh, through quickly because there's two books that I wanted to talk a little bit more about. And the first one is Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, which is Rushdie's greatest book. Um, it basically is like almost like a fantasy novel where it takes place during the time of the English exit from India and India gaining its independence back in like 1947, 1948, around that time. And basically, the handover happens at midnight, and this is basically a story about one of the children that were born at that time. But there's a whole group of children, everyone that was born around that 12 o'clock till 1 o'clock in the morning, that hour, all the children that were born that time. Rushdie gives them, supernatural powers, right? Like they have ESP or some other supernatural power, and he concentrates on one of them and goes through the life of that person, right? And with the backdrop of English independence and uh, the annexing of the country uh, because of Pakistan and all that other kind of stuff, right? So uh, it's a really interesting book, and it's his best novel, even though probably his most famous novel is the Satanic Verses because of the threats on his life from Muslim extremists and so on and so forth. But this one is his best book. So if you find this book, pick it up and read it. You'll really enjoy it. And this is part of the Everyman Library. Remember, I was talking about the Modern Library, and I showed you a Modern Library book, and Random House bought the Everyman Library's imprint, the imprint to that, and then they started putting them out in 1992. Well, this is part of the new version of the Everyman Library, and this is it's numbered, but they don't number it on the spine. They numbered it on the inside on the title page. So you have to open it up to look at what the number is. There's over 400 volumes in this library, and it's really fun to collect. And look how nice they are. They're really beautiful volumes, right? Now this one is number 217. All right. So I'll show it to you. So they're number 217. Okay. Um, so this is a fun. Uh, I like to collect the originals of the Everyman Library and the Modern Library, but they're really difficult to find because they're so old, right? You can find them online. You go on ABE Books, and the website ABE Books, and you can find them. You can probably find every one of them, but you're not going to, you're going to have to pay for shipping, and you're going to have to pay a premium on those books usually. Uh, but I found probably maybe 400. I'm guessing around 400 of them, 350 to 400 of the two libraries. Like 90% of them I found for less than $5 each, and they all have dust jackets. Right? It's really a lot easier to find them without dust jackets, but I prefer them to have dust jackets on them. So I'm never going to really finish. One library, the Everyman Library, has 1,000 volumes in it, and the Modern Library, which is the Everyman Library, is an English or British imprint, and the Modern Library is the American competitor or equivalent. That has over 800 volumes in it, right? So there's like over 1,800 volumes in both libraries together, and they're difficult to find without, I mean, you can find them, like I said, but you're going to pay a premium for them if you want to get them and you're not patient. But I've been collecting them since the 90s, and I only have maybe 300 to 400 of them when I need, like, not need, but if I wanted to complete those collections, I would need like over 1,800 of them. So you can see how, how difficult it is to find them um, at a reasonable price, right? But if you don't want to do that and you want a more modern version, these started coming out in the 1990s, and they're really easy to find. All right, they're not difficult to find. You can even find them new on the shelves of your bookstore, right? So you can buy them new if you wish. I mean, you're going to pay, like, this one was $33 in Canada and $23 in the U.S. So you are going to pay. I bought it for $10 used. Um, you are going to pay a good amount of money for them if you buy them new. But I don't know how many I have of them. I think close to 100 of the 400. So, and they're a lot easier to find. I'm picking them up, you know, um, every few weeks I'll get another one, right? So, Uh, and Rushdie is really good. Okay, so that's, I wanted to show you that Everyman Library. That's what they look like. Okay, they're really nice. They're made out of nice paper. All right, the paper doesn't really yellow over time as much, especially if you protect it. And they all have attached ribbons for bookmarks, so they're really nice. So that's Salman Rushdie's from the Everyman Library. And the last book I wanted to show you is um, I collect. So I collect the Modern Library. I collect the Everyman Library in their original formats, uh, and I collect the Everyman Library in the 1990s onward version of it. I don't collect the Modern Library from the 1990s onwards because they weren't numbered. I really like the numbering thing. It gives you an idea of what books are on it. The problem with the Modern Library is, I showed you the back of the dust jacket, and it gives you a list of the books, but you don't know how many books are in that library, and these lists are not, perfect, right? They do have errors in them, or those lists have been put out, and there's other books that have been published since. So you never know if you have all of them or not. With the Everyman Library, these ones are all numbered, so you know. If you want to collect from 1 to 300, there's 300 volumes, and you know the numbering scheme of it, right? So they're funner to collect when they're numbered, right? But I also what I do is I've read a lot of books, um, but a lot of them I've read and okay, it was all right. Others I've read and go, wow, that was a really good book. So what I used to collect uh, three other imprints or books or whatever, and those were uh, the Franklin Library, the leather-bound editions, and the Eastman Press, which is their competitor. Now, the Eastman Press is still publishing books in leather-bound editions, and the Franklin has stopped publishing them since I think it was the 90s. They stopped publishing in the 80s or 90s. They stopped publishing leather-bound editions. The Franklin Library, the Franklin Mint or whatever, they used to put out leather-bound editions, nice leather-bound editions. Uh, they're expensive. All right, if you're buying an Eastman Press or back in the day, you're spending like sometimes hundreds of dollars on each volume, right? So they're really expensive, and they're not numbered or anything. So, but they're really nice editions, and they look nice on a bookshelf. So I would collect those as well. Those two leather-bound editions, and there's another one from England called the Folio Society, which isn't leather-bound. It's a hardcover book, really nice cloth bound usually, and really nicely decorated, really nicely illustrated. And it has a box or a slip case that you put the book in, and it's a really nice edition of a book if you find them, right? But a lot of those volumes are obscure or Anglo-centric, and um, not a lot into literature. A lot of it is into history or other things, right? So but they do have a literature area of it. So I would collect those as well. But it's like a journal of London or something like that, or these obscure type of titles that they publish. Now they're really nice editions. They look really nice on the bookshelf. So some people use them for decoration or whatever. But they're expensive as well. So what I did was originally I was collecting them, but I have a limited amount of space, right? So what I decided to do was stop collecting the modern version of the Modern Library because they're not numbered, and stop collecting the Everyman Library, the Franklin and the Eastman Press uh, leather-bound editions and the Folio Society boxed books because there's just too many, right? So what I decided to do was I'll read a book, and if I really enjoyed that book, what I'll do is I'll go look for a really nice edition of that book as a keepsake, right? So that's how I would limit collecting those type of books. So the books that I do have, I still have Eastman Press books, I still have Franklin Library books, and I still have Folio Society books, but they're only of books that I've read and I want a keepsake of, right? So it only takes up one set of bookshelves for those books, right? And the reason why I'm talking to you about it is because I found one. All right, I found one. It cost me only $25 for this, and it's for Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. And basically, this is a Franklin Library. So this was published. Let me look quickly when it was published. And these are extremely good editions. All right, so this one was published in 1977. And look, it looks brand new, right? The person that owned this book loves books. You can tell just by how really nicely, I mean, there's no dents in it, there's nothing, and it's like 50 years old, this book, all right? It looks brand new. And these Franklin books also came with little booklets inside them, right? And these booklets are impossible to find, all right? Little essays and stuff about the book, all right? And how it was made and so on and so forth, right? So uh, you can see it's silk on the inside, all right? Really nice. It's gold foiled, right? So the reason why you see some books, even paperbacks, they'll have a green, a coloring to them or a yellow covering to them, those cheap paperbacks. Well, when you get into the high end of books, you'll see gold. This is like 14 karat gold covering of it, right? And the reason why they do it, whether it's on a cheap paperback or it's on this one, is because no matter what you do, paper over time will yellow or brown. So what they do is they stop that from happening by, putting gold over it, or a dye over it, so that when it does change color, you don't notice it because there's a green dye on it, right? Well, with these ones, they put gold foil over it, right? And it has a ribbon, a really nice ribbon for a bookmark in it as well. And usually there's illustrations on the inside. The the paper stock, look at that. The paper stock is still white and it's 50 years old, right? These are really nice editions. So if you come across any Franklin Library or Eastman Press books, they're the highest end of books, all right? And I only collect the ones that I've read that I really enjoyed. So this one is For Whom the Bell Tolls. I got for $25. So how can you beat that? That's really great. I don't know how many volumes I have. I probably have about, of the leather bounds, I probably have maybe 100, maybe of them, maybe 100 of them, right? So 75 maybe, something like that. I would have to count. But anyways, they're all over on my bookshelf over there, so I have one more to add to that collection. So, I mean, these books are extremely beautiful. Now, if you decide you're going to collect them indiscriminately, you better have a very large budget, because, you don't come across them very often for less than $50 each, right? So, and if you go into a used bookstore, you're going to be spending like $50 to $100 a volume on, depending, right? Uh, so yeah, get prepared to spend a good amount of money if you want these in your collection, or you just wait like I do. You look for them reasonably cost. I've found numerous. Most of the ones that I found for less than $15, some 20, but probably about 80% of them less than $15. But I'm around it, right? I know booksellers and that, and I can usually get a pretty good, reasonable price from them, right? So, all right, so that is everything. Hopefully this didn't run on too long. I tried to do as quickly as possible. Uh, those are some of the nice books and some really nice Steelbooks and Blu-ray replacements for my DVDs. All right, so overall, it was a good couple of weeks, right? All right, so thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. Think about subscribing if you so choose. I will continue doing these videos, all right? And I will see you in my next one. And look forward, like I said, to my top 130 movies of all time. It's going to be a long video for that, and it's hopefully it's extremely good, and you'll really enjoy it. All right, and bye for now.